بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. We're looking now at point number 50, as we started last week, in حلية طالب العلم, the etiquette of the seeker of knowledge. In the discussion of the foundation of your library, so we mentioned which books are we supposed to have in our library that is recommended for the student of knowledge. And we mentioned many examples. And the Shaykh, he continues, and he says from those books as well as the books of Hafiz Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, who died 852 Hijri. And many of us are familiar with Hafiz Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, because of his status in hadith, and of course, his many books. And the head of all of his books is the book Fathul Bari, which is the explanation of Sahih al-Bukhari. And this book in reality isn't just a book, it is considered by many scholars as a library by itself. Anyone who reads the book Fathul Bari, you will quickly realize that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he left behind a tremendous resource in knowledge, not just of ilm al-hadith, but also in all different sciences. So in there he explains the hadith in Bukhari, but he comments on fiqh, aqidah, history, narrators. And so this book is considered indispensable. Every student of knowledge is intended to try to have a copy of that book or access to it. And he has many other books. Right? So in the hadith sciences, Nukhbat al-Fikr, which is small and one of the best books you can start off. Not to start off, but you can study in the beginning of your study. And he has other books that the scholars recommend. His list of books are many. But his majority of his specialization or his authorship is in the sciences of hadith. Then he mentions the books of Hafiz al-Shawkani, rahimahullah. And many of us we know Imam al-Shawkani from the lessons Majid was teaching, Dur al-Bahiyya. And Imam al-Shawkani, rahimahullah, died 1250 Hijri. And so he's pretty close to our time compared to the other ulama. And Shawkani, his authorship is many, right? He has books in Aqidah, Fiqh, Hadith, and even about Adab or Akhlaq. So he's an author who's prolific. If someone were to read the biography of this Imam, you will also see that he was one who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him status. So he was actually a qadi, a judge for most of his career as a alim or as a shaykh. And he was combining between teaching and judgment and position. And he has a lot of work, right? The head of them being this book we were studying before, and the basics of fiqh. And then he has in there his own curriculum, which he established for the student. So from Dur al-Bahiyya, you start from there, and you move your way upwards. So some of his books he wrote, like in this series, were designed to go from beginning, intermediate, and advanced. So you go from there, you read his explanation, Dalal al-Mudiyya, and then you go forward to Nail Awtar, and then from there you can go Sayr al-Jarar, or you can do the other way around. And the books that he compiled are for beginners, and his focus is on ilm al-hadith and fiqh, combining the sciences of hadith and fiqh. So you have something where you combine between the knowledge of hadith and its understanding. So fiqh al-hadith. But also in Aqeedah he has books, and he also authored on different mas'alas or masail. Someone wants to read them, he can see them compiled in a book called Fath al-Rabbani, which is like the Rasail of Imam al-Shawkani. Right? It means like a lot. And he wrote a lot for someone who was so busy. He had a lot of authorship, rahimahullah. And of course, one who was, in that time, a very unique scholar. Then we have the books of Imam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, rahimahullah, who died 1206 Hijri. Many of us are familiar with his works, and we don't have to mention all of them. We've heard them before, we've seen them, but he does highlight one of the most important of them, and the works of the Mashayikh, which refers to the Da'wah to Najdiyya, the books, or the book particularly Ad-Durr as-Saniyya, which is a compilation of the letters, the books, the explanations of the ulama of Shaykh al-Islam's time and his descendants, means his students, his children, his grandsons, and etc. So the ulama who are al-Najd at the time. And this book is very important because it gives you a historical view as well as the first-hand accounts of the da'wah that was going on at the time in the Arabian Peninsula. Unlike what many people claim about the Shaykh, when you read that source, you get to see firsthand what the Shaykh was teaching, how was things going. So it's an invaluable resource. Ad-Durr as-Saniyya. Then he mentions the Alamat al-San'ani, rahimahullah, who died 1182 Hijri. Now San'ani came before Shawkani, But nonetheless, he puts him here. And San'ani was a contemporary of Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, Muhammad bin al-Amir al-San'ani. And what's unique about San'ani is that he, amongst Shawkani others, was like a series of scholars upon the Sunnah in a time period where the Zaidiyya from the Shia were prevalent in Yemen. So these scholars, they came at a time where it was very difficult, a hostile environment, to teach the people Sunnah and return them back to the Sunnah. Nonetheless, San'ani specialized in Hadith and sciences of Hadith and Fiqh. His best or most important work for the beginner and for the student is Subul al-Salam, Sharh Bulugh al-Maram. And so this book is so important. Many scholars consider it the best explanation available. Means for the person who is a beginner and wishes to study, it's not the only one, and relatively short compared to the others that are available. Alright, so some scholars, among them Imam al-Albani, they advise Subul al-Salam. And it's unique because the way that he does the sharh, he brings the explanation of the hadith and he brings fawaid. And the fawaid that he takes from the hadith is so unique because it's directly from the hadith but also very clear. So many benefits you can take from the book. San'ani influenced Imam al-Shawkani, such that he even saw a dream of him before, that he was in counsel, giving him words of condolence about the tragedies or trials that was going to befall Shawkani as well. So San'ani was a predecessor for many of the ulama in terms of his efforts. He's not the first of the people of Sunnah in Yemen, means that latter era, but he was among those who were prominent. Then he mentioned Alamat Sadiq Hassan Khan al-Qunuji, rahimahullah, who died 307 Hijri. And his great Imam is one of those who were influenced by Imam al-San'ani and Shawkani, more particularly Shawkani. And Sadiq Hassan Khan is unique because he was in the Indian subcontinent, and he was from those who ushered in the Ahlul Hadith movement into that region. Obviously not him alone, him and a group of scholars, Shaykh Waliullah, Shaykh Nadir Hussain, and a few others who were the founders of the Ahlul Hadith movement. And Sadiq Hassan Khan is unique because as a scholar, he had position as well, because he was married to a princess, and they allowed him then to use that power and that resources to spread the khair amongst the community. Alhamdulillah, we did a short biography of him before, in audio form. Someone can listen to it if he wants to know more about him. But no doubt this scholar is unique because of his knowledge and also how he continued the legacy of this great Imam before him. He continued the influence of Shawkani, because the ulama in Yemen at that time, unique Fath al-Majid, and even the ulama mentioned he translated into Urdu Fatawa Hamawiyya of Kubra of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. So he was a great Imam who was influencing the land. So it's very important to remember him and to see what these Imam were doing for the Ummah. And lastly, he mentions Alamat al-Shinqiti. As for Sadiq Hassan Khan, he has many books, many of them. Amongst them, Al-Hitta fi Dhikr al-Sihah al-Sitta, where he talks about all 6 books of hadith, narrators, how you can approach it. So many ulama say this is a good book to begin with if you want to know about the 6 books of hadith and how the hadith sciences are, and etc. Another book, Abjad Ulum, where he talks about all the sciences available in Islam and how to study them and what books are available. As the last one, Alamat Muhammad bin Amin al-Shinqiti, of course, a great Imam of our time, died 1393 Hijri, and this is the teacher of Shaykh Bakr Abu Zaid. So he mentions him because, of course, his teacher, he stuck with him for a while. But his books are many in terms of the books he authored, but not as many as other ulama. But he was no doubt a scholar of specialty. His specialization was in tafsir and in also the subject of aqidah and fiqh. But mostly the ulama say he knew every subject. He was a master of all of them. But he put his attention in tafsir. That's why his book Adwa al-Bayan, which he mentions the Shaykh here, is his best book, most popular book, which is the tafsir Quran bil Quran. So one of the ways you to explain the Quran is by reading the Quran and explain the Quran from the ayat in the Quran. Even though Ibn Uthaymin says in reality it's more than that, because if you read the book, it's not only Quran, he does bring hadith, but he chose not to in order to show how the Quran can explain the Quran, and also this is a type of tafsir which is very few books available in there. So his book became a contemporary book and also a reliable book and a very unique book, because when you read that book, you see how strong his understanding of the Quran was. And the ulama, they mentioned, as we said earlier, that if any scholar of our time deserved the title Shaykh al-Islam, it would have been him. Many ulama say by far he was the most knowledgeable scholar that they ever met. Means the science of Arabic and poetry, and he was unique. And what's also interesting, Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin studied with him as well. And Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin rahimahullah studied with him after Imam Sa'idi died. And from then he said when he studied with him, and then later on with Shaykh Ibn Baz, he realized Shinqiti's level was very unique. Right? There's a scholar, very few scholars were like him in the ability to have so much sciences. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon them all. The Shaykh stops the list of books there, but there are other books that somebody should put in the library. And these are reference points. They're not the books you only have. These are the maraji', the references. Because if you were to be honest, 12 scholars and their books are not the whole library. There are other books you get, small little books, rasail, a small treatise in this topic, a small essay on this one. And so we want to add a third one, 13 scholar, which you have to have their books, is Alamat al-Albani. And this is very important because you can't have a library that's complete without the books of Imam al-Albani. In Mustalah al-Hadith, his books are necessary. And Shaykh Muqbil rahimahullah is quoted to have said that any library doesn't have the books of Imam al-Albani is a miskeen library. It's a miskeen, it's orphan library. You have to have the books of Alamat al-Albani. And his books are unique because in the Mustalah al-Hadith, in the Ilm al-Tahqiq and Takhrij, he's the origin for us. Now that if you go and you want to do Takhrij al-Hadith, you have to rely upon his books. Especially the Silsilatain, the two books, Sahih and Da'ifa. But the head of his books, some ulama say the best of his books is not the Silsila in some of the ulama's eyes, it's actually Irwa al-Gharil. And they say this is the best book because in this book, Shaykh al-Albani combines Ilm al-Hadith and Ilm al-Fiqh. And that actually dispels the doubt whoever says Imam al-Albani wasn't a faqih, they didn't read Irwa al-Gharil. Because when you read that book, you see how powerful his opinions and his istidlal is when he's using the hadith and explaining it. Irwa al-Gharil is a takhrij hadith manar al-sabil. It's a checking of the hadith or verifying of the hadith found in the Hanbali book, manar al-sabil. So Shaykh al-Albani was a faqih, right? He had his books in fiqh, even his ta'liqat on fiqh al-sunnah prove his status in fiqh. But that book is ahead of his book some because they say there was never a book like that where he combines takhrij and tahqiq and fiqh. So it reminds us of the past books. But Imam al-Albani, he has so many books of his printed books, about 200 plus. But some ulama say he has way more than 200 books. That if there are some lists of books that suggest to Shaykh al-Albani, the books that he authored, edited, reviewed, etc., are upward or close to 600 or more. And so in reality, you'll be surprised many of Shaykh al-Albani's books are not in print. Many of them. Right? And sometimes you read the list of the books he left behind, which have not been published yet, you'll be surprised. So this author, rahimahullah, in our time is a unique scholar, which many scholars say that he was the mujaddid, the reviver of our era. Number 51, he says, dealing with the books. So how do you deal with your books? He says, you will never benefit from any book unless you know the terminology used by the author therein. And many a time the foreword is a guide to that, so read the book starting at the foreword. It's a great benefit. If you want to know how a scholar writes and what he's saying, you have to read the muqaddimah. A lot of times we just jump to the book and we start reading it, and you don't understand what the scholar is trying to say. So there are certain mustalahat some ulama use particularly to them. So an example, Bulugh al-Maram. For many of us who read it and have studied some of it, you see there's certain terminology he used. Rahu al-Khamsa or Sab'a. So if you don't know what he means by it, you will just say Khamsa, who are those? So in the beginning he tells you, okay, this is the way that he's going to be takhrij. Bukhari and Muslim, then Muttafaq alayh, then there's Khamsa, these 5 scholars, so Sunan plus 1. He tells you how the book is going to be organized. So if you don't know that, you read the book, you don't know. You think Khamsa is some kind of scholar, or you think Sab'a is a scholar, you don't know what it intended by it. So it's not allowed to read it without reading the introduction. Majid mentioned the example, same with Tirmidhi, what he meant by Hassan. He explains these things in his book at the end, Kitab al-Ilm. He does talk about his discussions about it, but you have to know beforehand what is intended by Hassan. And also, some of the ulama have special wordings that they use. So it's not allowed you read a book, you don't know what's intended by it. If you do this, you're going to misunderstand the book and even misquote the Shaykh. So very important, don't jump just to the book, read the foreword to see. Number 52, further into this, if you purchase a book, do not put it in your library until you have had a browse through it. Or read its foreword, its index, and a few extracts from it. If, however, you put in your library in this category, a long time will pass, and your lifetime will pass without looking into it. And this has been experienced, and Allah knows best. And he says that Allah alone is the giver of prosperity. So it's a benefit about buying books. And we're going to spend some time mentioning this. That Talib, he needs to spend his time buying the books and developing the library. And some of the ulama had a very strong passion for buying books. Such there are books to talk about this, how they were when it comes to books. And to us, we have to be this way. Ahl Sunnah, we're a generation, or a people of knowledge, but a people of reading. And our Salaf Salih were the best of our examples of this. And in our ummah, if you look at the history, we see that Muslims were prolific when it comes to writing, authoring, preserving books. It's just of recent that we have lost this tradition. And so it's important for us to go back to the reading tradition. And that requires buying books. So some ulama advise Talib al-Ilm who should have the number of the libraries and makatib, the bookstores, and he should call them frequently asking what books are new. Nowadays, right, thanks to social media, it comes to you without asking. So-and-so book came, or there's a group of books where the books are being sold or online buying, Talib Ilm should know all those resources and check frequently. Because this is important. Books that are new, you should try your best to obtain them when it comes to particular authors and particular subjects. So it's very important we have it up to date. Sometimes we don't keep up with the books and the books are progressing, and these books can help you in your research, your studying. So some ulama mentioned this, and some they also mentioned that if you look at our ulama, they were very keen on that. They mentioned, for example, Imam Al-Albani, rahimahullah, that he would often ask his students what's available on the market regarding Mustalah al-Hadith. And any book they would mention, he will send them to buy it, irrespective of the price, and they will read it and review it. And so some scholars were always like this. It should be our habit as well. And obviously we see sometimes the books are updated, some are not, but we should be aware what's being published, what's coming out. Another benefit when buying the books, you have to be careful you don't buy everything. Some ulama mention you have to know which book is the best available print, also the best tahqiq, if there's a tahqiq of it means a verification, or takhrij, or you check also the best taba' in terms of the actual print, means the print, its papers, its quality, because you don't want to buy a book twice, unless of course you're buying it to give away to someone else, but you don't want to buy a poor quality book. So for those reasons, some ulama also caution against the cheaper books, which are sometimes done for sale but not for benefit. So in some of the brothers, they've come to realize the prints from Egypt are not the most reliable of the prints, versus the prints you might find in Saudi and other. So very important, you don't buy every book that's available. And you have to ask if you don't know. Another benefit as well is that buying the book is always benefit. Even if you can't understand it, you keep it, because one day you'll benefit from it. And if you don't benefit from it, someone else can. It doesn't take away from buying it, because sometimes we become hasty or become neglectful and become worried. I shouldn't buy it, I won't read it. And some of the ulama, they mentioned biographies of the scholars that they were purchasing a book. Some of them, they were, mashallah, to a level that it's amazing when you read it. Some ulama, they mentioned like the story narration of a man named Abdullah bin Ahmed al-Khashab, that he sold his house to buy a book. And he wasn't even sure how he was going to, well, he purchased the book and then he didn't know how he was going to buy it. Means he'll pay back the due. So he was putting his house on sale. Allah allowed him to, through the qadr of Allah, be able to pay back the book and keep his house. Alright, but he put it on sale. Another Shaykh, he actually sold his house. And he traveled, sold it, bought the book, came back, and he made the money again. And no one knew about that. Right? He wouldn't narrate it. And some of them, they mentioned, but some scholars, that they saw themselves in Jannah. And they were in like a land of books. And they say they saw everywhere was books, and they read him. And they said, I ask Allah to grant me and what I love to do in the dunya and the akhirah. Right? So you saw books everywhere. And some of the mashayikh, they were known for that. Example, Abu Dawud was mentioning from the ulama hadith. Abu Dawud, rahimahullah, he used to have one sleeve, it was very long. And so one sleeve was normal. So they asked him, why is this one long? He said, he put the books in there. I used to keep the books in that sleeve. And the other one, I don't need it, he said. And this is how they used to be, carrying the books, buying it. And some ulama till today were like this. You read the biography of Shaykh Hamad Ansari, rahimahullah. Probably at our time there was no one like him when it comes to the buying of books and finding them. That he said he found, in his lifetime he purchased and gathered 5,000 manuscripts. And his library now exists in Medina as a library he left as a waqf for Tulab al-Ilm and the Bahithin. That's all manuscripts. Books that have costs, books that have the highest of degree in terms of their manuscript, original copies. So now it's considered like one of the known places in Medina. When the Shaykh was alive, as far as a Talib and also later as an Ustad and a Doctor and means teacher at the Jami'ah, he would spend his time going and buying these books. And sometimes he would be sent by Shaykh Abdul Muhsin Abbad to go and buy them for the university. And the Shaykh brought a lot of books. But this specialization in books was such that he mentioned one day that he found a copy of the book Tariq Dimashq. And many of us know this book is tremendous. Depends what print you get, it's huge. One of the biggest books we have today, probably the biggest book. Tariq Dimashq, he said he was able to buy it for about 7,000 riyal. And approximately $2,000 or so. And he said at that time, he bought it, and another time he bought the book Kamil, Ibn Adi. It's a book of hadith, narrators, weak narrators. And he bought it for about 1,000 dinar, which is all his salary for the month. He spent his whole monthly salary on that one book. And these stories, they reach the people. This is Shaykh Hamad would do this until later they will give him a budget to go and get the books. But this Shaykh, when you see him till today, these kind of mashayikh exist. They will buy the book irrespective of what the price is. And we should be this way as well. When you find a good book, you buy it. You shouldn't hesitate, because it'll bring barakah not to you, but your family and your deen. Because what you find in the books is knowledge. And the knowledge could change your life. It could actually get you a means to Allah's forgiveness in Jannah. Sometimes we need to look beyond the price, look at what the value of the book is. And with that being said, some people ask the question, how then can we study when we're so busy? How do we read books? Because we have no time. We're busy, we're working, and reading is tough. And the Mashaykh say you can combine between both efforts. It's not far-fetched that you can read and study and work. It's possible. And so for that example, some ulama, they mention, if you look at the biography of some Mashaykh, they combined. Example, they mentioned Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah. He was a bazaar, a bazaz, someone who used to sell the clothes. Clothes seller, merchant of clothes. So as Zannuji, he mentions in Ta'aleem Ta'allum, Muta'allim, Tariq Ta'allum, he mentions in this book that Abu Hanifa used to make munadhara, he used to debate with people and discuss with them Masail al-Ilm and his work when he was selling clothes. And he learns most of his fiqh that way. Imagine, this is a great faqih. He learned this by using the time. And it's not far-fetched that someone go to work and you listen to a tape, your free time. They don't prohibit you from that, you can do it. Or you have lunch break, you eat your lunch and you read. What prevents us from doing that? Or on your way to work, you put a tape, nothing prevents you. And it's not far-fetched because in today's time we have examples of ulama who did that. Because the Salaf used to work and study. It wasn't that all of them were studying only. So some scholars say, if you even look at our time, Shaykh Al-Albani, rahimahullah, again, a great imam, whose authorship and his books are so much, he used to work as a watchman, fixing watches. And they mentioned that sometimes they would come to his workshop at that time, and they would see those tulab there, and they were discussing. And one Talib said, I came to him, and I looked at one shelf above, and I saw his Ta'liqat Fiqh Sunnah. And this is before it was printed. It was there for a while. And I said, Shaykh, what is this? He said, this is some of the notes he was making on the book. And they pressed the Shaykh to print it. Otherwise, he wasn't intending to. And we see the book how it is now. And he didn't complete the book, but that was what he was doing. So imagine, he's at his work and he has his books, and the point was the marji' for the Salafiyun to come there. And later on, the situation changed. The Shaykh, he moved and he had a big library and was more focused. He stopped doing the watch repair because he's focusing more on ilm. But it's not far from us. That we have time, we should use it. Some people, they tell themselves, I don't have any time. And this is an excuse we bring. We all have some time, it's free. And so the average person may have 1 hour or 2 hours a day free time. According to some studies, they say an average person has at least 1 to 2 hours a day. He's doing nothing. She's doing nothing. Means between the day you have this empty time. We should try our best to utilize that time in the learning. Very important. And of course, if someone who wants more, there are books that discuss this, but time is limited, so we'll move to the next point because it's almost time for the salah. He mentions the writing with dialectical points. If you write, then write using dialectical points, which removes any obscurity. And obscurity can be mentioned in a number of ways. So Shaykh is advising us here, when you write with tashkeel, so you don't get mixed up when you're reading. So sometimes you have to make sure that your writing is clear, clarity of handwriting, and you have to study the rules of imla, how to write in Arabic, in order to avoid that. So he mentioned a list of books for those who want to learn, and there are many present books as well. So important to learn how to write in Arabic, and placing the diacritical points upon the letters that should have them, and leave the letters that shouldn't, and this will save us time. In the past, the ulama, they didn't used to do that. Some of them, when they write, so they used to mention, this one is vowelized, this one's not vowelized, so you will know. But the Shaykh says that vowelizing that which is obscure, a word you don't know, helps you not to mix up the word. So give an example, Shaykh Uthaymin, he gives about the importance of vowelizing the words, because sometimes you're memorizing and you're reading and you don't know. For example, there's the Hadith Bukhari, Muslim. It says that Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam كان يخلو بغار الحراء فيتحنث فيه الليالي ذوات العدد. Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, before he became prophet, he used to spend some alone time, means he secluded himself in the cave of Hira. فيتحنث, and this word you need to put tashkir on it. Shaykh Uthaymin gives an example because it's an obscure word. It means yuziru hinth, means he used to let out what is inside himself, means worshipping Allah. This was intended by it. In many nights he used to do that. So the word yatahannath, فَيَتَحَنَّثُ, is an obscure word, not very common. So it's good to put a tashkil on it, so when you're memorizing, you don't forget. And it's a benefit for memorization for all of us who want to memorize. Make sure you memorize a copy of a book that has tashkil. If it doesn't have it, it's not going to be easy to memorize. Ibn Salah, he mentions in his Muqaddimah, Hafid Ibn Salah, وَشَكْلُهُ يَمْنَعُ مِنْ إِشْكَالِهِ. That if you put tashkil on a text, it prevents from the ishkal. Ishkal means the confusion when you're reading and memorizing. So from the tips for hifd, make sure you read from matan that has tashkil. Because number one, it saves you from mixing up what you're reading. And number two, mistakes. Sometimes you memorize the Quran by accident in a mistaken way. It's very hard to remove it. Right? You have to keep repeating that ayah again and again to remove the mistake. So a benefit we take, always make sure you have that. And the Shaykh adds as well, put the tarqim, the numbers, and of the hadith and ayat in your text or when you're writing. So that way you have the reference. Nowadays, it's easy. You can get the Quran, ayat, which number, which surah. It helps for review. Chapter number 7, which is, I believe, the last chapter of this book. Inshallah, next week we'll try to finish this book. Now he talks about precautions. Now he talks about the precautions for Talib Ilm. Number 1, he says false hopes. The Talib Ilm should be aware of false hopes. And among them is to claim to have knowledge in something that you do not have knowledge of, or proficiency in that which you have no proficiency of. If you do so, then you will have drawn a thick curtain between yourself and knowledge. So the first one is that we should remove ourselves from thinking that we know something we don't. Sometimes it happens that you think you're proficient, but really you're not. So do not try to put yourself in that position. If you don't know something, say I don't know it, or I'm not very good at it. And sometimes out of humility, and other times out of true reality. So a student of knowledge shouldn't think that they know everything and that they're specialized in everything. Because if the people who were not professional or proficient in something stop talking and stop adding to the conversation, then there wouldn't be like a lot of confusion. Some of the ulama, they mentioned that if the people who were ignorant who did not speak, then there would not be so much ikhtilaf. But the problem is that a lot of people are in it, so that's why there's more khilaf. Everybody has something to say. Number 55, beware of Abu Shibr, the father of the handspan. And he said, if you said knowledge is, it was said that knowledge is 3 handspans. So number 1, whosoever enters the span will become arrogant. For the first shibr, when you study, you think you know everything. Right? You learn a little bit, and now you become a big shaykh. In your mind, you think you know everything, but you're arrogant. The second one you enter is humility. And after some time, the second shibr, you realize you don't know very much. You become humble. And the third one is that you enter the span which I think you know nothing. And this is important because these are stages of ilm. The first stage, when you learn a little bit, you argue with everybody. You try to refute everybody. You try to discuss with everybody. And really all that you know is maybe very less. And so this is a dangerous status every one of us can experience. And many of us have. That in the beginning you think you know everything. And you have to catch yourself. Just because you read one book, covered one text, you memorize something, doesn't mean you know everything. So the problem is that this is a natural state. So when you see in the beginning yourself as arrogant, you're telling people what to do and you're arguing with them, and even though you know you don't know very much, this is the first band. And then when you mature in your knowledge, you become humble, because you know in reality there's so much more you don't know. وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ. You know there's people more knowledgeable than you, and Allah is the most knowledgeable. Allah is Al-Alim. So when you reach that second stage, you're hesitant to say things. Maybe this is halal, haram, you say I'm going to double check. You're humble because you know, maybe I don't know. And the last stage, which is so important, is that you think you know nothing. Because you study so much, you realize you don't know nothing. And some of the ulama are often like this. They ask them, or they praise them, Shaykh, and he'll say, I'm not a Shaykh, I'm a Talib Ilm, Tawayr al-Ilm, I'm just a small student of knowledge. And they say this out of humility, but knowing full well that they don't know everything. And this is important because to reach that level, you have to actually be studying and learning. So when you reach the farthest end of knowledge, you realize knowledge is like an ocean with no boundaries, no shores. There's too much to learn. So what you do is you become so lowly, so lowly of yourself. And we see some of our ulama today like this. Some of us, we heard that, for example, the audio where Shaykh Fawzan, he's mentioned, they asked the Shaykh, how did you gain so much knowledge? So they say, I don't have knowledge. Shaykh Mbazi had knowledge. Me, I don't have. And he said this very openly because this is how he feels about himself. Despite the fact that we all know how great of a status of Shaykh he is today. And many of the ulama in the past were like this until today they are like this. So us, we shouldn't be arrogant. Know your level, but also pay attention to how you're learning. If you find yourself in every mas'ala you're speaking, you find yourself in every su'al you're answering, you find yourself in every single subject or discussion you have an opinion, this is a mistake. You have to be humble, and what more than that is that through the age, when you progress, you humble yourself, because ilm will humble you. And the best way to humble yourself in case you're having difficulty is sit with those who are knowledgeable. And this is how some of the Salaf would say that we thought we mastered a subject, and then I sat with Fulan, and then I realized I didn't know anything. He was in one valley, I was in another valley. Means I was over here, and he was over there, and he knew way more than I did. And that's why munaqasha is helpful. And what happens is that you start to realize, subhanAllah, what I thought was ijma' or jamhur was not even close. So be careful with these different stages. And the Shaykh also mentions, we'll finish with this point, is that beware of manifesting or becoming manifest before becoming qualified. Beware of becoming manifest before becoming qualified, for it is the defect of knowledge and actions. It was said, whosoever manifests himself before his time, then he will manifest himself to humiliation. which means you're hasty. You try to come forward to give lessons, or you try to teach people, or you try to do something which you're not capable of. You will humiliate yourself, and also you will not benefit the people. And this is something which all of us has to be careful of. So you double check, should I give this speech? Am I qualified to talk to someone about this? And if you know something, then you share it. You shouldn't be shy. And one at the point there, Shaykh Uthaymeen, we're talking about Abu Shibr, he says some of Tulab al-Ilm, they're so humble. Some of them, they think they become so humble that even though they're like a status of alim, they ask something, they say, I think and I don't know. He said, this is wrong. Your knowledge is enough that you can say firmly, this is right, this is wrong. So you shouldn't reach a level even when you know, you're still keeping quiet. Or that you know something, you think you're out of false humility, you don't speak. This is not correct. Once you know something, you have to teach the people, you have to share with them. But when you're not qualified, you have to be careful. Because when you take positions of authority to teach, or become an imam, or the khatib, what's going to happen? You don't have that much time to study. So that's why the famous statement, Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu authentically said, تَفَقَّهُ قَبْلَ أَن تَسَوَّدُوا. Learn fiqh before you take status, a position of leadership, or before you become the leader of the household, or whatever you want to interpret. The ulama interpret this in different ways, but that's the general intent. Learn before you take a position of leadership. Because if you're the khatib or the imam now, and you're giving the lectures always, and you don't have time to study, or you don't have time to even learn something. For example, you can't go and say, I'm going to begin learning something. You should already know it. And you run out of time, and secondly, you start passing opinions that misguide people. And we also want to remember the usul, the principle we mentioned in fiqh, that من استعجل شيء, whoever tries to hasten himself into say قبل أوانه عوقب بحرمانه. Whoever is hasty in trying to obtain something before its emergence, he will be tested or trialed with his deprivation. Means if you try to become a shaykh before you are, then you'll never become one. Because when you reach the status you thought you were a shaykh, people realize quickly you're not a shaykh, but also you also become so humiliated you won't go back there. It happens to people. They put themselves forward, and then it happens they don't do good. And then it happens they retreat, and that's the end of it. So always be careful not to do more than you can handle. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you tawfiq and you're able to learn, then you try your best. Inshallah, we'll end with this much. If anyone has any questions, otherwise I think we will leave the questions for the next week. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.